Yellow.
Hello. Hello.
Hello. Hello. Righty.
You had mentioned at the end of last session this thing before about that the obligation to testify is yarod v'lo yabor.
It's possible. Well, I guess that is boiling down the question. Is it because your point was maybe it's like other mitzvos and you're allowed to put yourself to some degree in danger with other mitzvos. So maybe that should be the parameters for this mitzvah. Or is this Yaharig Val Yavor, and it's not like other mitzvahs, that this is in the category of those four, and that not only are you allowed to put yourself to some degree in danger, you must put yourself in danger, even if it's almost certain that you're going to be killed for giving the testimony. So I had heard, Rabbi Rosner had mentioned it. I don't remember who he quoted the name of. He just mentioned that that it seems like that this should be categorized as Yaharig Val. The way they treat it, that it should be categorized as Yaharig Val Yavor. But maybe there are places that don't. But yeah.
You see, the Rambam takes this as axiomatic that if you're under onus, you are not punishable. Now, he explicitly says you're not punishable by base din.
Did he say? Oh, you're talking about that's even the Yaharig Val Yavor ones.
Yep, even he says.
Yeah, but it's not. It's only based it obviously min hashamayim. You are
no, it's not obvious. Now, he's very careful to tell you what people do that don't, like if you're in a city and you have a tyrant, and if you don't try to escape the city, he tells exactly what happens to you. If you violate, except for those 3 mitzvahs, you won't eat kosher food. He says you have to give an accounting for your soul. He never mentions anything about punishment. As a matter of fact, he goes out, he says, and he takes it as a major premise in the Kal V'chomer. He says that we know that even a person who worships idols, if in public, if it's under onus, he's innocent. And the verse that he uses is the verse that from the woman in the field who's raped,
right?
And he uses he uses that as being a thing of onus, and he also uses that there's absolutely no culpa. So it's
all right. Let's just 1 second. Okay, I remember now that you brought that up before. I'm just going to look here for 1 second if I can find something.
The Rambam, he says you violated this mitzvah, you violated this, but you negated to him. Negating a positive mitzvah, is something bad. And he says, but there's no punishment. And he never hints that there's punishment from anywhere. Maybe that's just a problem with the Rambam. He had only listened to his elders.
If Chazal watched Law and Order enough and saw how many witnesses got killed.
Right, they changed their minds fast. That's why Ben, remember, he quit when his witness was killed.
Yep.
He gave up the practice of the law.
Well, in that office, anyway. Yeah.
If the courts can't do punishment, then they can't enforce. They can't flog you in order to compel testimony. Except in maybe extreme circumstances.
I remember that Barrel Wine, he was talking about the conversos. Like, there were people who initially converted to Christianity, as an outward thing, and then a lot of people had left before, and then there were the people who converted and stayed, but then even they left. Not all of them, but some of them left. So let's say you had one of those people that went to like Amsterdam. So in Amsterdam, you had people that had fled beforehand and had established a Jewish community. And then you had some of these people that were coming who had stayed and converted and were now coming. And there was tension because the people in the community, the established community, considered these people to be traitors because they had stayed and converted. So I seem to remember that he said that, I forgot who it was, but somebody suggested that if they are lashed, in other words, if they're willing to take lashes, that the lashes of a court, a human court, would resolve the kores level penalty. So if they were given lashes, they wouldn't be liable for a kores level penalty. There was some assumption that these people who converted would be liable to a kores level penalty. I just don't know. I don't know. The subject is such a big subject that when I search for it, I can't find our specific discussion. But I get it. It's you just wonder then, what is the benefit of letting yourself die if there's not going to be any punishment at all?
But you get the biggest mitzvah of all,
which is Kiddush Hashem. You're just missing an opportunity to do a Kiddush Hashem.
Rabbi, I'm sorry to interrupt, but I was just saying, could you please just tell me what you guys are talking about? I don't remember it from yesterday, but what is it?
Right.
So I can understand.
This discussion is, let's say you have, because we were talking about, let's say testimony, you're a witness, testimony. You saw a murder. You live on the south side of Chicago and you saw a murder. Now, you know that the murderer is a part of a terrible gang. And if you go to the police, that gang will kill you or kill your family. So are you obliged to go forward and testify? Now, let's say this may only apply in a Jewish court, the kind of thing they're asking us to do here. But let's say you had a similar case. So would you be obliged to testify? So there are two measures for a mitzvah typically. There's the for most mitzvahs, almost all the mitzvahs, the measure of how much danger you're allowed to put yourself in order to do the mitzvah. Usually there's a certain amount of danger you're allowed to put yourself in. So, for instance, there's important mitzvah to have children. So, but if a woman becomes pregnant, and especially up until modern times, if a woman became pregnant, there's a serious risk that she could die. So is she allowed to become pregnant? So obviously they ruled that she is. So you're allowed to put yourself into some degree of danger in order to fulfill a mitzvah. But you're not allowed to give up your life to fulfill a mitzvah, because the Torah says that you have to guard your life very carefully and you have to live by the mitzvah. So we learn from that you're not allowed to give up your life typically to fulfill one mitzvah. There are some exceptions, so the question is, is this mitzvah like that? So the mitzvah to give testimony, if we treat it like a regular mitzvah, so what you'd say is you're supposed to do it, even if it has a modicum of danger. But if it has great danger, like the scenario I was describing, you wouldn't have to do it. In fact, you wouldn't be allowed to do it, because you'd be putting your family at serious risk and yourself at serious risk. And it's not like just a few percentage points. It's like very high chance of risk. So you wouldn't be able to testify. Or do we say that this mitzvah is meant to be sort of in the category of what we call the cardinal sins, and that is, it's actually that you're supposed to be willing to give up your life, even for this mitzvah, to testify. And then we would say you must, or you should testify, even though your life is in danger. So David had brought this up earlier, which is even those ones, the cardinal sins, like let's say somebody puts a gun to your head and says you have to worship idols. So you're supposed to let him kill you. But let's say you didn't. Let's say you worship the idol. So what's the fallout from that? So it's very clear that it's not actionable in court. Nobody's going to take you to court. If you're in that scenario and something threatened your life, and you bowed down to idols, and you started to, even if you went on to become a sort of like a priest in that situation, so always forced. So then it's not actionable in court. The question is, what is the response from heaven? What we would call the response from heaven. So is there a heavenly punishment, even though there's not an earthly one? So David is saying, if you look at the language of the Rambam, when he talks about this, the Rambam, first of all, the comparison case, which is a woman being raped. So in the case of a woman being raped, that's actually the source for our notion that if something's happening to you against your will, that you're not judged for it. So there, we don't just mean that she's not judged in a human court. We mean that God's not judging her either. In other words, it's what we call onus rahmana patre. The God himself, does not, says the person is not guilty. And that's a source. The rape case is the source for the whole notion that people aren't held responsible for things that happen against their will. So there, it's not just talking about in a human court. So if the Rambam is comparing somebody who serves idols against their will to that, then it would seem like even God is not considering it a problem. So even though you're supposed to give up your life for idolatry, if you didn't, in a situation where you're forced, you're not judged by man or God. You're just not, you missed the opportunity to sanctify God. So so the question is this thing of having to testify, which category is it in? Is it in the category of regular mitzvahs? Is it in the category of these mitzvahs that you have to let yourself die? You still have to fulfill it? Or what's also interesting is this is a positive commandment. It's not a negative commandment. The other ones are all negative commandments. Don't murder, don't commit adultery, don't commit idolatry. They're all negative commandments. Here, you would be violating it by not doing something. That also might be an interesting factor here. Because really, how do you violate it? By not doing something. So that's another interesting thing. Yeah, anyway, so the question is to what extent do you have to put your life at risk to testify? And let's say you didn't, what is the consequence in the eyes of man and in the eyes of God? The person who was writing the article that we read yesterday, he made the point, and you also see this to some degree in the language of the commentaries on this mitzvah, that a legal system requires people to be willing to come forth and testify. The system breaks down when nobody will come and testify. Jewish law, especially in the Beit Din, very heavily relies on witnesses, on eyewitnesses, and so it will break down if witnesses don't come forward. So if you have a situation where people are afraid to come forward, the system is going to break. So you could hear how some people would like to think of this as no exception, that everybody has to come forward. But that's not how we typically treat mitzvahs. And this isn't usually listed as one of those mitzvahs, Yeharik Val Yavor. All right, so that was that. All right, in Mitzvah 180, that is that he commanded us to render witnesses that testify falsely liable for the punishment that they thought to bring about with their testimony. So this is Eidim Zomamin. At first blush, it sounds just like people that we've seen lie. Well, we saw this in the Gemara, I think yesterday or 2 days ago. The Gemara in Daf Yomi was talking about Eidim Zomamin, and it said they were talking about contrasting the case of Eidim Zomamin, which are witnesses that testify, and then it's found out that they weren't there. Other witnesses come and testify you weren't there. They're not testifying that they're lying. They're just testifying that they weren't there. They couldn't have seen what they say they saw. So that's Eidim Zomamin. That's what he's talking about over here. The other case would be witnesses. Let's say you have two witnesses that come and say, Bob killed Joe. Bob killed Joe. And then a few days later, Joe just walks into the court. Joe's alive. So they're obviously lying, these witnesses, because they said Bob killed Joe, and now Joe walked in, he's alive. So that's a case where you have witnesses that testified falsely, and your proof they testified it falsely, incontrovertible proof that they testified falsely. That's not this case. This case is specifically that other witnesses say you couldn't know that because you weren't with us. so that's Adam Zomerman. All right, so let's see how he presents this, though. He says that, that is that he, God, commanded us to render a witness that testify falsely liable for the punishment they thought to bring about with their testimony. The other case that I described, where the guy walks in, they would get lashes. They would get lashes, but they don't get the death penalty. They're not called Adam Zomerman, it's just called a false witness. And that is his, God, may he be blessed, saying, and you shall do to him as he schemed to do to his brother. This is the law of a scheming witness, Adam Zomerman, scheming. They call it scheming, is Zmama, or that's how he's translating it. If they testified to cause a loss of money, we make them lose the same as the accused would have. If they testified something that would bring a death penalty, we kill them with that death penalty. And if they testify something that would bring lashes, we give them lashes. The regulations of this commandment and the issues that have arisen and how we certified that the witnesses were scheming to the point that we judge them with that law have already been explained in Tractate Makos, and that's Sam's expertise, Tractate Makos. He is the master of Makos. So again, for some reason, the Rambam is not even going into that detail that we're talking about it, but that is the case. That Adam Zomerman, the scheming witness, is specifically found out because others have claimed that he wasn't there. He couldn't have possibly known what happened because he was with these other witnesses when this happened. We had a discussion about whether what the connection between witnesses that are contradicting other witnesses and the witnesses who say you weren't there, that there could be cases where you have both elements. So for example, let's say that Bob killed Joe. This is a different case. Bob killed Joe, and there are two witnesses who come forward and say, Bob killed Joe on Monday. Now, there's a second group of witnesses that come, and they say, Bob killed Joe on Sunday. You couldn't even, and you couldn't have even known that you're contending that he killed him on Monday. You weren't even anywhere near there on Monday. Anyways, you were with us on Monday. So you actually have both conditions here. You have the condition of contradicting witness because they're saying it happened on a different day. But you also have them saying you weren't there. Or they could have said, let's say the first witnesses say Bob killed Joe on Monday, and the second witnesses say Steve killed Joe and he did it on Sunday. So now they're contradicting that even Bob did it, right? And they are saying that these second witnesses weren't even there. So now you have elements of both contradiction and what you would call scheming witnesses. There is a whole discussion about are these really like on the same line? In other words, do they is contradictory witnesses and scheming witnesses connected at all? Is scheming witness a version of contradicting witness? Is it a whole new thing? But anyways, the Gemara explores that, and as do the commentaries. This is a very prescribed mitzvah. At first blush, it seems like a sort of interesting, kind of intuitive way of doing justice, almost like an eye for an eye kind of justice. And at first, again, you would think that this would apply to all false witnesses. Then you find out that it's limited to witnesses where another set of witnesses say you weren't there. You also, it's further prescribed in that if the sentence was already carried out, then you don't apply the punishment to the person. This is counterintuitive. But let's say the person was already killed by the court. And then these witnesses were proved to have not been there. In such a case, they don't get the death penalty. It's only if, as a result of their testimony, this person's convicted, but the sentence is not carried out yet. During that window between the conviction and the sentence being carried out, the other witnesses come. That's the classic case where they get what they were testifying about. But if it's either before it comes to conviction or after the actual sentence is carried out, in those cases, the witnesses do not get that penalty. So it starts off sounding like very broad, and it ends up being quite constricted. But it does have that element of the eye for an eye. It sounds like it's kind of Solomonic wisdom, like it just measure for measure, and real justice. But again, it's so prescribed that it seems like it could rarely be applied. There is, when I was taking that course, that Coursera course with Barry Wimpheimer, it was a course on Talmud that was being offered at the beginning of Corona. Coursera was offering all sorts of courses for free. And somebody told me about this Talmud class, David Ash, and said he was taking it. So I took it also. And that was the first time I really studied academic Talmud at all. So I found it very interesting. But one or two of the sessions were devoted to this issue of Eidim Zomerman and the development of it, because you have it as presented in the Torah, and then you have it as presented in the Mishnah. By the time of the Mishnah, it's already clear that this would only be applied in a case where the person wasn't executed yet. But in the Torah, that's not clear. So they were looking for text that could bridge the Torah, the way the Torah sees it, and the way the Mishnah describes it. They're looking for some intermediary text that might help show the development of the law or the transition of the law. And so they found something called the Book of Susanna. I think it's called the Book of Susanna, which is an apocryphal work. It's a book of Apocrypha. It's not included in any Jewish canon, but it seems to have been written by Jews about Jews. And it has a story of witnesses who testified that somebody did something that would lead to a death penalty, and then the people are taking the person out, ready to stone them. And then somebody comes forward and stops them. So they believe they found this transitional text, which I guess would be a huge thing from an academic approach, to show what they are suggesting is the development of the law from the Torah to this work shows an intermediary status, and then you have the Mishnah, which would show the final status, the way it's presented. So again, this is not a kind of study that would have happened in yeshiva. It's not anything I was used to, but it was sort of interesting how the whole thing happened. Okay, so that is this. New mitzvah number 181. That is that he commanded us to behead a calf according to its commandment when a corpse is found in the field and it is not known who killed him. And that is his, may he be exalted, saying, if you find a corpse, etc. This is the law of the beheaded calf. The regulations of this commandment have already been explained in the last chapter of Sota, that means tractate Sota. See also Parshat Shoftim. So what happens in this scenario is that you, outside of the city boundary, so let's say you have a city and there's some kind of line that signifies that you are now beyond the city. So somewhere beyond the city, somebody finds somebody who was slain. So let's assume they were slain by marauders. They were killed by marauders. So they determine which city this corpse is closest to. And then there is this ceremony where the elders of the city are present. There's a kind of riverbed. A calf is taken to the riverbed. The calf is slaughtered. It is not slaughtered in the usual way. That's why they're calling it beheaded. It was slaughtered from behind with an axe, a very sharp axe. So it's slaughtered from behind. And then the blood is collected. The elders dip their hands in the blood. Then they lift their hands up and they say that their hands are not responsible for the blood of this corpse. What they mean is that their city, under their guidance, provides protection for all people that are inside the city, and that they also gave protection for the person as they left their city. Now they're not responsible to give protection for this person for the rest of their life, but that seems to be the responsibility of elders of a city, to make sure that the city itself is safe and that people who are visiting the city or traveling from the city have safe passage to some degree outside the city. So the only ones who can claim innocence are people that actually have been providing that kind of environment.
I heard a slightly different twist on the story, that the reason that they take the oath is to show that the scenario that they project, rather than they were killed by marauders, is that they didn't have enough sustenance in order to enable them to go on. So what they were forced to do, they try to rob somebody else, and they were killed in the process of that.
Interesting. Why do you think they had to go to that extreme?
I don't know, but I remember that there was one of the.
All right. All right. All right. We'll leave. All right. Well, let's look into that. And also, what I'd like to explore is how far does this go? So let's say you're the mayor of a town like Bnei Brak. So it's a religious town in Israel. There's other religious towns in Israel. Let's say you're the mayor of that town. So how far does this go?
Well, you don't expect
don't
expect a military escort everywhere, but you do expect enough rations in order that you're able to survive.
No, but also, no, they're not talking. Let's say you're within the city. This is assuming that the city is a safe place. But let's say you have a city where crimes are committed. So this makes it sound like it's the mayor's responsibility. What does that mean? It's the mayor's responsibility or the elders' responsibility. How far does that go? Let's say there's crime.
Yeah, but he's left
what does
the
it
city.
mean to be held responsibility? Let's say his blood did spill this thing. In other words, we're assuming that this guy, I would suggest it's a kal vachomer. If they are going to be held responsible for the guy after he leaves the town, certainly they are responsible for the guy when he's in the town.
Okay.
And if somebody gets harmed inside their town, they're responsible. What does that mean to say they're responsible? In what way are they responsible? Like you do have the Kohen Gadol on the line. When somebody kills somebody by accident, he has to go to the Ir Miklat, and he goes to the Ir Miklat until the Kohen Gadol dies. Now, why is it related to the Kohen Gadol? So there are commentaries who suggest that if the Kohen Gadol had been doing his job properly, praying on behalf of the people, you wouldn't have had accidental deaths, something to that degree. So that's why he's like connected to it. To what degree can these elders be held responsible for what happens? And what does it mean to say they're responsible? In what way? Is there a heavenly punishment? Is there some kind of tshuva they have to do? Is there, what does it mean to say somebody's responsible? What if they did shed this person's blood indirectly? What are the consequences? What does it mean? So I'd like to explore that too. Okay.
Thank
I
you.
say we do that. I look
Wow.
forward to doing that tomorrow.
Thank you.
All right, be well.
Bye-bye.
you.
all.
Bye.